This film follows Paul Brett, an MBA student at the University of Wolverhampton, on his visit to Banks's, a local company which brews traditional British beers. Paul is doing research into the brewing industry and is hoping to meet the company's key personnel and see the traditional brewing process for himself.
Good morning.
Good morning. I've got an appointment with Richard Westwood at 9:30.
Could I have your name, please?
Paul Brett from the University of Wolverhampton.
Right, I'll just let him know that you're here.
Thanks.
Hello, Richard. Mr. Brett from Wolverhampton University is here to see you. Right, thank you very much. He'll be here in a short while. I'll just write out a visitor's card for you.
Thank you.
Have you found somewhere to park?
Yes, I'm in the visitors' car park along here.
Right then, thanks
Is that
very
all right?
much. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, good.
I'm surprised you've managed to get a space so close with the weather being not so nice.
That's right.
There's a card for you. If you could just keep that with you today while you're at Banks's, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ah.
Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Richard.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. And you?
I'm fine, thanks. Did you manage to find us okay?
Yes, we're okay.
Right. Before we actually go around the brewery and look at the process, I'd like us to have a very brief 10 minutes with our managing director, David Thompson.
Okay.
He's actually
Brilliant.
waiting for us upstairs.
Thanks.
Okay? Through the door.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alison.
David Thompson, Banks's Brewery was founded by your great-grandfather. You're the current managing director. Could you tell me a little about the company, please?
We started over 100 years ago. We've always been based on this site. Our development as a company has been organic, and actually, surprisingly, although we've grown from being a very small local brewery company to becoming the largest regional brewery company in the UK, we've done so entirely by the self-invested funds. We've never had a rights issue or issued shares for acquisitions since our incorporation in 1891. So we're unusual in that. We are one of the oldest public companies in the UK, but we've funded our development entirely out of profits and borrowings when necessary.
Okay, thank you. Could you tell me a little about the current state of the market, please, David?
Well, we are the largest regional brewery company in the UK, and we've got about 6 or 7% market share in our local area and about 4 or 5% market share in our total distribution. And that gives us national market share of between 2 and 3%. So we are actually quite a small fish in a very big pond, and a very profitable pond, and one with a lot of opportunity. The market itself, however, is characterised at the moment by overall declines in volumes. The volume in the beer business rose to about 44 million barrels in 1979 and has declined now to about 35 million barrels. And that's really a result of demographics. There are fewer people now who work in heavy industries like the steel industry. It's also a matter of changing consumer patterns. Much more drinking goes on at home, and when you have drinking at home, you generally have lower volumes than you do in on-trade, that is in pub consumption. So it's an industry which is highly profitable, but one where the underlying demand base for beer has been steadily eroded over the last 10 years. What we are doing instead is offering a wider range of higher value items like food and soft drinks, and we also have a very substantial income from gaming machines in our pubs, and that has meant that overall on-trade profitability has remained very high and indeed continues to grow.
Could you tell me about the current state of the market in the brewing industry, David?
Well, the major trend at the moment is towards drinking less, but buying better.
Is that connected with health?
No, it's got nothing to do with that. I think it's really just to do with the demographics. There is a larger proportion of the population are now in the age group 25 to 45 than was the case before. Most people who are in work want to drink relatively modest amounts because they go out less often. People are working harder than they were perhaps 15, 20 years ago. And also, when people go out, there is a bigger sense of treating than was the case before. So what people tend to do is drink less but better and pay a higher price for it. Yeah. So there is a trend throughout industry towards premium products, and that's been going on now for a very long time. So the dynamic sections of the market our premium lagers, our premium ales, premium cask ales like our own, like the imported lagers, and Zamek, for example, which comes from the Czech Republic, is an example of this, which really do attract consumer attention. And it's one where the discussion with the consumer, the communication with the consumer, is much more about product values than it is just about branding. And I think that is the really interesting development in the beer business at the moment. So those products which in the past have relied solely for high levels of advertising support, which have all been about image, are actually doing less successfully than those ones which have got decent, well-defined product advantages in terms of their delivery.
Could you tell me about any future developments for Banks's Brewery?
I think the most important thing about a regional brewery company, most regional brewery companies have relatively small market share in their area. Our particular market is about 40% of the UK, so we distribute and have access to about 40% of the beer drinking population of the UK. So you can imagine with about 2 or 3% overall market share nationally, that means we've got about 5 to 6% market share within our chosen distribution area. If you've got that level of market share, then quite clearly the potential for growth without having to diversify and enter new areas of business is much greater. There's much less risk associated with development of the business by remaining a vertically integrated regional brewery company, of looking to grow market share both by introducing new alcoholic products of one sort or another, new retailing concepts, and indeed just simply by expanding distribution. And that's what we intend to do. We've got a number of new developments of new products, the latest of which is a Czechoslovakian lager called Zamek, which we have bought from České Budovice, which is the main heartland of brewing in Europe, where the first Budweis beer was produced many, many years ago, and we've introduced that on the market recently. That's the kind of new developments that we're doing. But in all cases, what we're seeking to do is differentiate ourselves from national brewers who are much bigger than us, and if they choose to make life awkward for us, have much greater financial resources. But actually what we've got is the strength of good local knowledge, of very tight lines of communication, of sound logistics and very tight distribution, and we can convert that into higher levels of profitability and greater net margins.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, I'm going to go off with Richard now and have a look at the brewing process. Look at the brewing process.
Right, the area we're now standing in is called the brew house, and represents the first part of the brewing process proper. Prior to this, the barley that we purchase each year, which is the basic raw ingredient, actually gets converted into malt at our own maltings, which are about 12 miles down the road. That process itself takes about 10 days and is a very traditional process. The malt which is then produced gets transported to the brewery in 20-ton tankers, and it arrives in the brewery on a daily basis.
I think we saw them being delivered just now.
We did early on, yes. And we use about 40 tons a day. So we take in a significant amount.
Sure.
This fairly simple mimic diagram illustrates the process down to where we're standing.
Right.
And quite simply, the malt, after it comes into the brewery, gets stored in 8 35-ton silos, which actually behind us, behind the wall.
Okay.
The malt then gets taken from those silos sequentially, depending on the particular recipe.
Right.
A fairly simple microprocessor controls the amount of malt and the degree of malt that we take out of each bin. That malt then gets crushed in one of 2 fairly large mills and produces a material called grist.
Right.
It's that grist which provides the basic raw material for the end product. That grist gets mixed with hot liquor or hot water at a fairly precise temperature of 148 degrees Fahrenheit and produces a consistency which is a bit like porridge. And in fact, that's the smell that you can smell now.
Right. Okay.
This porridge is then allowed to stand in one of the mash tuns that you can see behind us, and it stands there for about an hour and a half.
Right.
During that time, the enzymes which are naturally present in the malt begin to convert the insoluble starch into soluble sugar. It's the sugar that we're after. It's the sugar which the yeast needs to feed on and produce the all-important material called alcohol. The stand time takes about an hour and a half, after which we spray, or sparge, technically as we call it, sparge liquor, hot liquor, onto the top of the grains. That water then percolates through the bed of grains, dissolves the sugar, and that sugar then goes on to the next process, which we'll see now.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
on we go. Right, this is the next stage of the process, which is called the boiling stage. The liquid which we produced in the mash tuns is now called wort, and it's basically a sugar solution plus other flavour components. And that liquid falls by gravity into one of these fairly large copper vessels called coppers. And quite simply what happens, at the same time we add hops, which we purchase locally, and the whole lot, the wort and the hops, is boiled up for an hour and a half, during which time the bitterness which is in the hop is being extracted into the wort. After the 1.5 hour boil time, that wort is then passed on and cooled down to 62 degrees Fahrenheit and passed off into fermenting vessels. That process of fermentation takes about 6 days, and it's a process whereby the yeast is beginning to feed on the sugar and converting sugar into alcohol. After that process, the beer can go into one of 3 or 4 different areas. It can go into cask, it can go into kegs, or into bottles and cans. The process from then on is the difficult bit, which is selling, which we're going to speak more about now.
Fran, could you explain to me what the role of the marketing department is within such an organisation as Banks's?
Well, Paul, the role of any marketing department is very much to make sure that the products and services that are supplied by any company are very much in tune and fulfil the needs of the consumers within the marketplace.
So what particular marketing initiatives are you involved in then here at Banks's at the moment?
Within Banks's, the role of the marketing department is really to develop all our brands to their maximum potential.
Right.
Now that covers a very broad cross-section of activities, ranging all the way through from devising and implementing advertising strategies, all the way through to product development, packaging, organising promotions, looking at pricing and also market trends as well.
Yes, I've seen the recent television campaign. It's quite interesting.
They've been very successful for us.
I believe there are 3 exciting initiatives that you're involved in at the moment.
Yeah, well, the first is the development of Banks's Mild and its introduction to new drinkers, as we see it as a product with very easy drinking characteristics and one with tremendous potential, with a lot of people to tell about it.
Yes, mild slightly different from bitter then, a slightly different product.
It has been a different market, but we see very much that Banks's Mild can hold its head high in the bitter market as well.
Thanks, and there are another 2, I believe.
Yeah, the second development that we have at present follows our acquisition of the Cameron's Brewery company up in the northeast of England in January '92. Now they have a very strong brand called Cameron Strong Arm, which is a premium bitter, so very different from Banks's Mild.
Yes.
But again, its unique characteristics make it really stand out in the marketplace, and again we believe consumers will be very excited by Cameron Strong Arm.
And they were an independent brewer like Banks's?
Very much like ourselves, very similar structure, but just a different part of the country.
Okay, and I believe there's some, you've been involved in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, the final really exciting development at present is attacking the premium lager market, which all the statistics are telling us is the most dynamic sector of the market at present.
Right.
And we've gone international for the first time, and we've imported the brand Zamek direct from the Czech Republic, the Czechs being the country who invented lager in the first place.
That's right. Okay, and is it going well, Zamek?
It's going very well. We're very pleased with how it's going at present.
Okay, Bram, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
This is Paul, who spent most of the day going around the brewery, and I thought it would be quite good if he finished off his day with a quick pint before he left.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, it's nice to get to grips with the product. Thank you. Fascinating day. Can I just ask Ian, Banks's use a very traditional process here, and you think it's important in brewing beers?
Yeah, you may have noticed when you walk around, the materials we use are traditional English ale brewing materials, English hops, English malt, and the process we use traditional pieces of plant, mash tuns and hop backs and small fermenting vessels.
That's right, yes, we've seen those, yeah.
And using neither of those is particularly cost effective, as it were.
Right.
When it comes to bottom line money. But to produce cask beers that way is the best way of doing it, and particularly in this area there's a strong tradition of cask beers because of small breweries like ourselves.
Yes.
It's what the consumer demands.
Right, yes.
You'll find in some of other breweries similar to ourselves which have been taken over in the past, they've tried to brew traditional beers in a lager plant because that's what they've developed for, but it doesn't work the same.
No.
So it's because it's what the consumer demands.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that we don't produce cask or traditional beer just for the sake of it.
No.
We brew traditional beer because we think that's the best way of producing beer.
Right.
The best raw materials, the best equipment, the best people. Stick those all together, and it's our belief and experience is proving it's right, that is actually the best way to produce the best quality product.
What then are you looking for in the final product, in the beer? What sort of qualities are important to you?
Right, well, firstly in terms of the palate, on both our products, Banks's Ale and Banks's Bitter, we're after a very clean and fresh flavour, okay? They're of primary importance. From the brewer's point of view, we're tending to look for a balanced beer, okay? What this means is that there's no one individual flavour component within the beers that masks the other flavours. They all want to be in balance.
I see.
Overall, we want to produce a smooth beer, and we have a term that we use within the brewery known as moorish. Okay, we want a moorish product that the customer will enjoy. Once the beer is out with the customer out in trade, we want the beer obviously to be star bright. It wants to be bright for the customer, and also we want to be able to produce a good full head on top of the beer that will touch the top of the glass, and also hopefully the head will stay with the product all the way down until the pint has been drunk.
Right. Okay, thank you. Steve, could you tell us then what happens to the beer when it leaves the brewery? Yeah.
Right, yeah, we deliver it to one of our many pubs or clubs using our own fleet of transport, our own lorries.
Right.
We have about 850 of our own pubs, of which about half we actually employ the managers ourselves.
Okay.
Our trading area covers mainly sort of the Wolverhampton, West Midlands area, but we do have pubs as far northwest as Manchester,
Right.
southwest as Bristol, and perhaps as far east as Northampton and Milton Keynes. But the story doesn't really end there. We also have a team of cellar advisors who'll visit the pubs, check over the cellars,
Right.
make sure the beer is stored correctly and hopefully served correctly.
To check you're maintaining the quality for the customer.
Indeed, yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Certainly for traditional beer, which is what Banks's is all about, the process of conditioning the beer and storing the beer at the pub is very important.
Okay.
Because the beer has to settle and clarify for at least a day before the licensee can serve it in prime condition. And because of that, we actually spend a great deal of time and effort making sure the licensee is actually trained to be able to do that. It's a very important part of the process.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, everybody. A fascinating day. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.